by addressing digital collection diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, internship-based audits at first step. Today, we have the privilege of exploring how libraries and information professionals are taking innovative steps toward creating more inclusive and accessible digital collections. We are fortunate to have Dr. Tami Blumenfield today, Kuiji Scholar of Ethnology at Yunnan University and Adjunct Research Assistant Professor, University of Mexico, and Mēgan Oliver, Head of Digital Projects, University of Missouri, Kansas City. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we will be sharing insights. They will be sharing insights into this impactful work they have done. They've been working with in this area. And so before further ado, let's welcome Dr. Blumenfield and Mēgan Oliver. Dr. Blumenfield, would you like to start? Can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Is everything okay? Is your presenter not here?
Can you hear me, Dr. Blumenfield?
Okay, I can finally unmute.
Can you hear now? Okay, great.
Would you please allow me to share my screen? Thank you.
Okay. I wasn't sure about if my voice was coming, but thank you.
Okay, everybody, can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Wonderful. I would like to also show you my video. Let me just pause this real quick so I can do that. Thank you all for your patience. I had to switch computers and then the preparation we made so carefully became a little bit changed. Okay, I'm going to skip the video and just go ahead and get started. There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm presenting on behalf of myself and Mēgan today. Mēgan is unable to join us, but I'm presenting a virtual internship experience that she led and that I was the intern for at the University of South Carolina. We are very grateful to SJSU for hosting this session, to Libraries 2.0, and to all involved for hosting this. And thanks to all of you for joining us too. Okay, a lot of what I'm going to start with is something that everybody is well aware of that's listening to this. We have become increasingly aware of the responsibilities that we have as libraries in general, and specifically as academic libraries. We need to use appropriate language. We need to ensure that we're serving as information stewards for members of our community. But we face a lot of challenges, and that stems from the kind of society we have been up until this point in many places, and in some ways that we are still grappling with. So we have issues with disparities of types of information collected, archived, and digitized. We have overrepresentation of some worldviews over others. We have problematic language use, and we have many kinds of inaccessible practices. Digital collections amplify some of these issues because the way that many collections were digitized and continue to be digitized has been so haphazard. Many institutions now have policies for which materials should be digitized and which should not. But that did not always, those policies did not always emerge in the early days. And also we've made so many changes as a profession in descriptive metadata and different kinds of standards. Also, the people that are doing the metadata entry are often not trained in DEIA issues, and the ways that naming practices have shifted over the years have not always been incorporated into their work. So there is an issue, as everybody experiences in some way or another, of resources. It can be difficult for people to have enough resources to do everything they want with libraries, and going back to all those materials long since digitized is not always easy or fundable. This presentation describes how an internship was used to take a first step toward dealing with some of these issues. And as you'll see, it wasn't a perfect solution, but I think it's a good model that I wanted to share with everyone else for ways that some of these issues can begin to be dealt with. I do want to say that bringing internships is a double-edged sword. As an intern, I was a mid-career professional going back for an MLIS degree. And so I had a certain amount of professional presence I brought to the internship, but I was not a paid employee of the university library system. And that, in a way, gave me some ability to say things that might have been difficult to say if I were depending on the institution for my livelihood. An outside consultant could also fill that kind of role if interns weren't the right solution. So the context for this talk is, and for the internship, was the University of South Carolina. It is in a historically difficult part of the world that a lot of the wealth and a lot of the history of South Carolina was built on institutionalized racism at best, and enslaved people's labor, unpaid and horribly exploited labor at worst. There are many other axes of difference that I won't get into, but let's just say that there was a lopsided history of who was talked about and whose voices were celebrated and recognized within the special collections and archives. Out-of-date language and offensive language were both big problems. And then, as I mentioned, there was a lot of inconsistency about what kinds of materials were digitized, and also issues of ownership and control. Now, for those of you who work within institutions, hopefully you'll recognize some of this. Every institution is a little bit different from a structure, but what happened is there evolved these different pockets of places who had different resources, and the way that they were described, even in terms of websites and platforms and everything else, was quite different across one place to another, let alone priorities. And do we take this kind of DEIA work top priority seriously or not? So the first building, and I kind of broke this down by building to give you a sense of where this is located, is the main campus library. That's where some of these materials are housed. Then there's the South Caroliniana Library, which has a lot of the historic material that privileges a certain perspective on South Carolina history. And then there is a separate building, which is the Special Collections Library, which includes digital collections, the moving image research collections, and also the music library within the School of Music. So digital collections is both, a unit within special collections and also the unit digitizing all of this. So it's kind of a difficult situation to be in. When I first started the internship and was looking through the website and trying to make my way, I kept getting hopelessly confused because, as you can see, there's this whole patchwork of different kinds of collections. And then there's also a way to search for the special collections, but it's not unified at all. So this is the internship description, basically saying we're auditing the collections for these different parameters. And the goal is to create respectful, professional, legally compliant digital collection development criteria for the digital collections department. That was what we did. And the next step is, the idea is to edit and add digital collections to the repository in the future. So I worked with one other person, and we got a spreadsheet listing all the digital collections at the university. And our first job was just looking through them. What is there, what exists, trying to find our way through everything. We chose 3 collections each, and then we're given 2 collections to audit. So this is only a tiny bit of the many, I think it's something like 160 collections that the university had at the time. But it was a good starting point, and it was, I think the whole philosophy of this is, let's start where we are and then not worry too much about being perfect or completely comprehensive. We looked for resources about digital collection audits elsewhere and found there was hardly anything at all. There were a couple blog posts that we drew from and benefited from, but the other things were mostly about like the digital materials, like streaming film content at a university library system. And then of course, there's a huge literature on physical collection materials audit. It's just much more difficult to figure out how to even get a sense of what materials there exist within digital collections, let alone audit them. Another part of our internship was meeting with the digital collections team and other library stakeholders. And this was really eye-opening for us and useful as students learning about the library profession, because we were doing this remotely. This was our opportunity to get to know people that were working in the had created much of metadata and done the hard work of getting to this point. One of the memorable quotes from one of the people we spoke with was, "They have what they have and we scan what they have," which was very disturbing to me personally, because, you know, if the things you have are reflecting the voices of wealthy white people, and especially wealthy white men, then you aren't going to be including a lot of important voices that I believe should be included in a state university special collection. One of the other people we spoke with said she was always looking for fair representations of diverse peoples, and what she said is, it's darn hard to find them. We really struggle to find anything other than white men and white women. So later we did find that these materials do exist, but it's just a question of getting through this maze. How do we find these? How do we make these materials accessible? And then how do we make sure that the materials that are there are appropriately described and ethically described? And moving away from this procedure of just scanning what they have. Mēgan, because she's not here today, I figured I would give her voice in the quote in a university library publication about the project. She said, every now and then we have to look up from our narrow scope of research and check to see if we're doing what needs to be doing. Through this audit, we're making sure we're moving forward with the world and telling the right story. Okay, so once we had done this background research, we developed criteria upon which to audit the collections. The first set of criteria is diverse content. I'm just giving you a kind of taste of what we did here today. And I'm happy to talk more about the details later on. So we looked at different kinds of diversity. Of course, the term diversity is an open term, but we looked at different kinds of non-white histories. In South Carolina, there's a really interesting group of people called Gullah Geechee. In coastal areas, there's also Latina-focused collections we wanted to incorporate more. And then, of course, non-male history, LGBTQIA+ histories, disability and ableness-focused histories, and histories of newer communities. Like we have a large Colombian population in Greenville, South Carolina, and those folks are really just not represented in a lot of archives. The next set of criteria we looked at was accessibility. And from my own perspective, just trying to make my way through the collection, I wanted to think about accessibility not only along the standard axes, like making sure that people who have vision, hearing, or mobility differences can access the collections, but also making sure that someone who doesn't have a doctorate can open the website and find where they if they are not you know, web accessibility standards say that language should be written toward an 8th grade reading level. We just want to make sure that people can access that. If they're not very comfortable navigating websites, we want to make sure that the website is accessible as possible. And those of you who have worked with Content DM know it's not the easiest platform to work with. And so some of the suggestions we made were a little bit, you know, we could make the suggestions, but not necessarily implement them. At the time, the university was in the process of switching to a different management system. So some of it, you know, can be aspirational. We wish that there were a better way to have descriptive text. We wish this were better able to work with screen readers. We understand that right now it just might be difficult. But we also found a lot of times, you know, there would be a finding aid that was linked to an old collection that was no longer an active link. So just making sure that all of this was as streamlined as possible was also really important to us. Just for another example, this is from Clemson University Libraries. Maybe they do have that same kind of fragmented set of special collections, but at least they had more of a global web page and then a search page that said, you know, we've got all these images, all these objects, here's the keyword box, you know, click on it, you can get the advanced search. I also appreciated about their website, you know, this is a poster from, it says, I can't breathe. It's a Black Lives Matter poster. And so they're highlighting diverse elements of their collection on the start page. We recommended that people build landing pages to welcome visitors because archives and special collections are just by default so different from what many library users are used to using. We wanted to also advocate that people use video introductions and other kinds of formats. Some people love video, some people hate video. Just making sure that everybody can be served by using different kinds of formats. And then this is actually something I was glad to see from the time when we did the audit until now. Some of the materials that were not full text searchable before have now become full text searchable. And they've used Google Lens to kind of use OCR to kind of auto scan things. So there are ways to kind of go after particular collections and try to make them more searchable, because that handwriting is just almost impossible for many of us to read if it's from, you know, a couple of 100 years ago, or even if it's not from very long ago. So that those kinds of collections be prioritized for digitization and also transcription. But we also thought, well, if a site could have a request for access button just embedded right into the site, that would send a message to everybody that we are trying to make this reachable to anyone. So please let us know what you need. And that will also kind of help with resources. It allows more of like a just-in-time resource allocation. There's also the web accessibility evaluation tool, where one can just put a website into a URL into that website and immediately get feedback about what needs to be changed. There are standards for colors, fonts, headings, ordered lists, and even periods between initials to help people that are using screen readers access materials more efficiently. And the last thing that I haven't mentioned yet is just making sure that the title field will be as descriptive as possible. I'll give an example in a minute where a collection had many images that had the same name. And that's just very difficult for people if they're trying to identify the distinctions from one thing to the next. And finally, just thinking about visual to audio materials, a lot of the materials in collections are visual. And while there are oral history collections, and those are important, there tends to be a kind of imbalance in the format types within collections. So even where there is a visually based collection, just thinking about how there could be alternative ways of presenting that information so that more people can engage with this. And of course, asking real people, you know, like me, coming in without any experience with this collection, what's the way to work? What's the challenge? What are the sticky points?
this is something, I think that the concept is just making sure that people can actually use it and seeing what problems they have, because not everyone is used to using these kinds of platforms. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of perspective of some of the collections that we saw and some of the issues we saw.
There was this really interesting collection. It's called the Harbison Agricultural College Photograph Collection. And this is from the South Carolina Library. So the collection has a pretty good amount of text introducing it. As I read through the story of the history of the college, now think about 1885 in South Carolina. That was a very tricky time. It was post-slavery, but it's not like once slavery ended, suddenly formerly enslaved individuals were treated cordially and with utmost respect by people who had formerly enslaved them or had been part of the culture of slavery. So the institution was started in 1885. 9 different times it was burned down. Now, it could be that some of those times were accidents. It could be that some of them were accidents and some were arson, but it's unlikely that an institution was burned down 9 separate times. I don't think we have, you know, that kind of history for the University of South Carolina. And even if it did burn down accidentally 9 different times, you know, what was the structure like? What kinds of resources they created a situation where it could burn down 9 times, right? So I just wanted to show you some of this text. It starts innocuously enough. 1885 it was founded. One of the buildings burned down before it could be completed. These are just, imagine dot, dot, dots in between these. Later it was closed, and there was the second series of fire that destroyed the women's dormitory. Each time the fire burned down something, it was like a death blow to the school. It was very difficult, obviously, and it seems to have eventually killed the school altogether. So then we have the third fire. 3 students were killed. Then there was another fire in 1941, and 1952, the church burned. 1953, the women's dormitory burned. So, you know, but, oh, sorry. By this point, that was it. So for me reading this, I really want to see something that says, you know, it's not a passive thing. It's not that the school burned. I would want to see it say something like, arsonists burned the school. Here's what we know about that. Here's a link to some more information. Here's where you can find more details on this. And even if we have no more information, here's, you know, what I would say is probably going on in this kind of situation. But none of that was there. So that's one example of things that our audit found that we wanted to recommend be dealt with differently. Another example, this is actually a more positive example, the Modeska Monteith Simpkins papers. It's a fascinating collection if people are interested. And at the time that we did the audit, it was not OCR searchable. So there was amazing material in there, but it wasn't really accessible to a lot of people. But now I just tried it out today, and you know, you can search for a particular word and see exactly which 16 pages it appears on, click on the page. You still have to find it within the page, but it's much better than it used to be. It could still be better. It could be, you know, be lovely to have a full transcript available, but it's getting much better than it was. And the collection like this, I think, really needs to be used more widely, not only in the university, but also in K-12 settings, because I have a son who's a high school student in South Carolina, and they still really are rooted in this kind of education about, you know, there was slavery, and then there was the civil rights movement, and that's, you know, that's a lot of what they learned. So just to have a different kind of a voice, different kinds of experiences of African-American people is something I would love to see. Okay, and then the next example is the Beulah Glover photograph collection. This is an example where the names of the collection are just a little strange. So this is Young Girl at Well. And then this one is called Dwarf Woman Holding Plate with Turkey Picture on Porch with Young Girl. And that's all that it says. That's the entire description. The photographs themselves don't say anything like, this is when this was photographed. There's no information, like even from the range of dates these photographs were taken. So it could be really great, but it needs a lot more metadata and a better finding aid to be useful. Okay, so recommendations for others doing this work. This saying I like, the perfect is the enemy of good. You can't do this perfectly, but you still should try. If you start out by looking at different stakeholders, resources, visions, and barriers, it will be very helpful in the long run. And ideally, there will be a DEIA vision or a library strategic vision that includes that. But if not, coming up with that vision might be an important starting point. A pilot can help, and also thinking creatively about resources. People that are student desk workers who are mostly doing their homework while working in the library, they could help with some of the audit work. They could look at a collection and give feedback. Unpaid or paid interns could help, graduate fellows, and then grant funded staff or even permanent staff, even if a few hours a week are allocated toward this work, that could help. There's also the question of what happens after the audit. What to do with that information? Well, ideally, we'll move toward a different type of collection, a different type of collecting. We'll think about which collections to showcase, and we'll work on reparative description practices using anti-racist standards. We'll bring in people that are committed to doing this kind of work and provide professional development so that they will be supported in doing the work. But sometimes that's not possible. And sometimes an audit happens and little moves. And that's a reality sometimes too. One should also be very mindful that this is dangerous work, and it's important to protect people in the process. Care is also important because it can be demoralizing looking at these images and looking at how overwhelming this can be. But keep in mind, a long journey starts with a single step. So don't lose heart. And the last thing is just let's all share how we do this, because it's so difficult to figure out how to do an audit of an incredible array of materials. So let's please all share, including what didn't work. This is an article I found recently that does an excellent job of explaining exactly how they went through and did the audit, and I think can be a great resource to people. We're also working on an article about our own audit, and just kind of bringing more examples of what people are doing will hopefully provide a better platform. And just a note of thanks to the people who developed the anti-racist description resources that we relied on. There's some wonderful material out there, and I encourage you to look at more. So please feel free to contact us if you have further questions or comments. And I think we have a few minutes for Q&A, if possible.
Thank you very much, Tami. And I think your voice is going in and out. I don't know if you are aware, or I don't know if there is an audio problem on your end. It's this way for me and for another. Yeah, for a couple of our invitees here.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, Tami. And we really enjoyed listening to you. That was a very rich discussion, and we appreciate the valuable insights. And as we wrap up, we're going to have the questions flowing up on the chat box. So please either unmute yourself or ask your questions in the chat, and we will take care of these. Thank you. So I have a question actually, and I would like to know what were the challenges as an internship to have this internship done, and what was the biggest challenge that you had encountered?
The biggest challenge was having a lot of opinions and having to be diplomatic about it and doing it remotely, not having access to the sort of hallway conversation and building a relationship with people to kind of gauge like who could we speak more frankly with and who did we have to be careful with. And for those of you who were in the last session with Dr. Cook, talking about being in a red state and having to sometimes change how you name things and just be very careful about doing diversity work, that was a huge challenge for us, just knowing that people might be very offended by the work we do, including people within the library system, including people whose collections we had been digitizing. And so just finding, how do you work with that? And I think also being at peace with, okay, this is a start, and maybe this is just we'll give some ideas and do anything with them ever, and we'll share them with the world. Like Dr. Cook was saying, maybe you go to the Library Association versus your institution. But I would definitely say that was the biggest challenge for us.
Thank you very much, Tami, and thank you very much, everyone, for all our participants to joining us in this session. And I don't see any other questions in the chats. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Tami.